Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the show where we take the sprawling, overwhelming information sphere and distill it down to the essential structure, context, and surprising insights, custom tailored for you, the learner.
Today, we are definitely diving into a challenging landscape.
We really are. We're attempting to map the rise, the thought, and the ongoing controversies surrounding Jordan Peterson.
It is a vast and intensely scrutinized body of sources we are dealing with today. Peterson, born in Edmonton in 1962, is a Canadian physician whose professional life began firmly rooted in clinical psychology and academia.
And that's the key, right? He moved from that very specialized world into the, well, fiercely contested arena of cultural and political commentary.
And achieved global prominence, particularly in the late 2010s through these new channels of digital media.
And the complexity starts right away because he's an intellectual figure who resists easy categorization, which is, I think, why he generates so much heat.
Absolutely.
Our source material notes this immediate inherent tension. Peterson identifies publicly as a classical liberal and a traditionalist, claiming to champion Enlightenment ideals like free speech and individual autonomy.
But he's consistently described by journalists, commentators, and even conservative figures themselves, like the philosopher Yoram Hazany, as one of the most significant conservative thinkers to appear in the English-speaking world in a generation.
That dual identity, it's fundamental. The classical liberal who champions traditional Western values.
It is. It's fundamental to understanding his influence and, his self-perception. His work sits at a peculiar intersection. It's this combination of deep academic analysis of myth and totalitarianism.
With self-help advice and highly polarizing political rhetoric.
Exactly. A very unusual mix.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to dive deep into this extensive material. We want to extract the structural architecture of his thought, tracking his evolution from a specialized professor analyzing the origins of collective evil,
to a figure challenging modern cultural norms.
We'll be connecting the dots between his academic foundations, his core arguments, the key legal and regulatory controversies he ignited, and the severe, very public health struggles that have punctuated his recent career.
We're here to understand the context and the trajectory that created the Peterson phenomenon.
Okay, let's unpack this architecture, because his intellectual blend is certainly unique. We have to start with his early path.
For sure.
His educational background established a pattern of combining political interest with psychological rigor. He has 2 BAs from the University of Alberta.
Right, one in political science, which gives him that macro view.
And then one in psychology, which gives him the micro individual view. And then he moves on to McGill University for his PhD in clinical psychology.
And his doctoral work itself set the tone for focusing on internal dysfunction that, translates into external chaos. His research wasn't abstract at all.
Not at all.
It was intensely focused on patterns of destructive behavior. His thesis, Potential Psychological Markers for the Predisposition to Alcoholism, focused specifically on familial alcoholism and associated psychopathologies.
Things like aggression and hyperactivity.
Exactly. This demonstrates an early, deep clinical focus on the measurable, destructive roots of personal disorganization.
What's fascinating here, according to the biographical sources, is the narrative pivot point early in his life. As a young man, a pivotal moment in shaping his educational focus and his whole worldview was reading George Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier.
That's a key detail.
It seems like that wasn't just a casual read for him. It was the trigger that shifted him toward examining the psychological origins of major social pathologies and political extremism.
That Orwell experience was crucial because it led directly to an academic gap year that really defines his intellectual foundation.
He went to Europe.
He took a year off, specifically studying the psychological origins of the Cold War and 20th century totalitarianism. He wasn't just interested in what happened, but why. Why do people succumb to these murderous, catastrophic belief systems?
And when you look at his intellectual pillars, it all makes sense.
It really does. Dostoevsky, Jung, Neumann, Nietzsche, Orwell, Piaget, and of course, Solzhenitsyn.
You realize this is not a toolkit for, managing personal anxiety.
No, it's an intellectual lineage intensely concerned with the dark side of human nature and collective ideology. Specifically, as he would put it, the structures of hell.
Speaking of major careers, he spent a significant amount of time in the U.S., which accelerated his reputation. He taught and researched at Harvard from 1993 to 1998 as an assistant professor.
And the sources detail the extraordinary early impact of his teaching. They note he developed something akin to a cult following.
Which is an amazing phrase. We even have anecdotes of a former PhD student recalling students crying on the last day of class because they wouldn't hear him lecture anymore.
That level of devotion for an assistant professor of psychology is, well, it's highly unusual. It shows his charismatic impact was there long before YouTube.
It speaks to a powerful teaching style that synthesized disparate fields, something that breaks through the standard academic lecture format.
For sure. In 1998, he returned to Canada to become a full professor at the University of Toronto, where he spent the bulk of his traditional academic career.
And his professional focus areas remained highly integrated.
Right, covering psychopharmacology, the psychology of religion, personality psychology, and political psychology. And importantly, for most of that period, he was intensely engaged clinically.
That's the part people forget. He maintained a practice seeing about 20 people a week.
And he only paused that clinical practice in 2017, right when his public profile just exploded.
That clinical background, the fact that he was treating real, individual human beings struggling with the chaos of their own lives, seems absolutely crucial.
It is. It provides the essential bridge to understanding his first major published work in 1999, Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief.
And that book is dense. I mean, it is demanding and requires serious intellectual commitment from the reader.
Maps of Meaning is the foundational text. It's the Rosetta Stone for all his later work. It's an attempt to synthesize psychology, mythology, religion, literature, philosophy, and neuroscience to analyze how belief systems are constructed.
And the core question.
The core question, as we noted, was why groups and individuals engage in pathological, murderous atrocities. He specifically cited the Gulag, the Rwandan genocide, and Auschwitz. He was trying to map the structure of meaning using archetypes and narrative that allows ordinary people to justify or commit horrific evil.
So his first major work was a deep academic attempt to understand ideological identification and the origins of totalitarian mass murder.
Yes.
This is the synthesis needed because this intellectual architecture, analyzing the origins of collective pathology, stands in stark contrast to the books that brought him global fame years later, which are, focused on individual self-help.
This is the key pivot point that needs to be synthesized for you, the learner. The jump from the grand structural theory of maps of meaning to the accessible, marketable advice of 12 rules for life is bridged by his clinical practice.
Oh, okay.
Maps of meaning was the theory of collective chaos. But seeing 20 individuals a week for decades, people dealing with depression, anxiety, alcoholism, relational conflict, gave him thousands of data points showing where the theory of chaos and order applies at the scale of a single human life.
So he essentially reverse-engineered the grand philosophical and mythological structure into actionable individual psychological advice.
That's a great way to put it.
The structure of meaning that prevents totalitarianism also perhaps prevents one from lying to your mother or abandoning your responsibility.
Exactly. The complex, abstract archetypes derived from Jung and Nietzsche were simplified into maxims for personal behavior. The collective responsibility for avoiding hell was converted into individual responsibility for cleaning one's room.
And that simplification proved extraordinarily successful.
Unbelievably so. In 2018, Penguin Random House published 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos. It jettisoned the heavy academic tone for an accessible self-help style, promoted via a massive world tour.
And it became a multi-country bestseller, making him a global figure almost overnight.
And then the sequel, Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life, followed in 2021. And this publication even generated internal controversy at Penguin Random House Canada.
Right, where employees criticized the decision to publish it during an internal town hall, viewing his public persona as problematic.
That internal dissent highlights the scale of the cultural polarization he generates within institutions, even the ones capitalizing on his success. But structurally, the success of the two rules books gave him the financial and media platform to transition away from traditional academic life.
Which culminated in his retirement from the University of Toronto in 2021, where he became Professor Emeritus.
The foundations were academic, but the consequences of that foundation were profoundly public and eventually highly political.
And here's where the academic life meets the digital culture war. Because the transition from tenured professor studying Jungian archetypes to global media figure was catalyzed by one specific Canadian political flashpoint, Bill C-16.
This is the definitive pivot point in his career narrative, and it's where he first achieved global notoriety. In 2016, Peterson released a series of videos criticizing the proposed Canadian federal law Bill C-16.
which aimed to add gender identity or expression as a prohibited ground of discrimination under the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code.
Exactly. And his central and highly aggressive claim was that this law, combined with existing provincial human rights legislation, would legally mandate the use of certain preferred gender pronouns.
Constituting what he called compelled speech.
Yes, he explicitly argued he could be prosecuted under human rights laws for refusing to use them. He linked this opposition immediately to a broader, fiery critique of political correctness and postmodern ideology.
An ideology he felt was sweeping through academic institutions and into the legal framework.
And this is where his rhetoric escalated dramatically, demonstrating his willingness to use hyperbole to underline the perceived threat.
It really did.
Just 2 months after his initial video, he published an op-ed detailing his opposition. And he claimed that gender-neutral singular pronouns were at the vanguard of a postmodern radical leftist ideology that I detest.
And here's the kicker.
And which is, in my professional opinion, frighteningly similar to the Marxist doctrines that killed at least 100 million people in the 20th century.
Wow. When you link a law about pronouns to the Gulag, you instantly launch yourself far outside the bounds of traditional academic discourse.
And right into the culture wars.
Now, we must treat the legal counterpoint with equal weight, as the sources provide a clear refutation of his central argument.
A very important point. Law professor Brenda Cosman and other legal analysts firmly stated that Peterson's interpretation of Bill C-16 was mistaken.
They argued precisely that the law does not criminalize the misuse of pronouns and pointed out that his interpretation conflated human rights legislation with criminal law in a way that legal precedent just did not support.
Which essentially dismantled his central claim of actionable, compelled speech.
But the fact that legal experts disputed his core claim didn't slow the institutional consequences he claimed to face.
Not at all. In April 2017, Peterson was denied a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, or SSHRC, grant for the first time in his career.
And he publicly claimed this was in retaliation for his C-16 statements and his challenge to institutional norms.
The SSHRC, for their part, responded neutrally, maintaining that committees assess only the information contained in the application, suggesting the grant was simply non-competitive on its merits.
But the audience response demonstrated a new economic reality. The immediate, robust response from his emerging audience was dramatic.
It really was. A crowdfunding campaign, launched by Rebel News, which the sources identify as a far-right outlet, raised $195,000.
Which he claimed was equivalent to 3 years of research funding.
This moment demonstrated the power of his newly galvanized non-academic audience to financially support him when institutional funding allegedly dried up. It was a declaration of independence.
It signaled a new and powerful economic model for public intellectuals, direct audience support as a counterweight to traditional institutional approval.
And this dynamic was then amplified during the infamous Lindsay Shepherd incident in November 2017 at Wilfrid Laurier University,
which became a global flashpoint in the free speech debate.
It really did.
So let's unpack that incident in detail, because it was a moment of stark institutional panic.
Shepherd, who was a teaching assistant in a first-year communications course, showed her class a clip of Peterson debating Bill C-16, just as part of a discussion about language and pronouns.
Seems pretty standard for a university class.
You'd think so. But she was subsequently censured by her professors during a closed-door meeting. The reaction was extreme. She was told the clip created a toxic climate.
And it was aggressively compared to providing a speech by Hitler in a classroom.
And that it was allegedly itself a violation of C-16.
The overreach was stunning, and the incident went viral, confirming for many of Peterson's supporters that the intellectual corruption he spoke of was real and pervasive within academia.
The censure was subsequently withdrawn, of course, and the university and the professors involved formally issued a public apology. However, this didn't end the legal fallout.
No. In June 2018, Peterson filed a $1.5 million lawsuit against Wilfrid Laurier University, alleging defamation based on the statements made during that censure. Shepherd also filed a separate lawsuit.
Right.
This raises an interesting contradiction in the source material we must reconcile. If his message is pure radical individualism, clean your room and fix yourself first, why did he then dedicate so much time and energy to filing this massive lawsuit against WOU?
That's a sharp point.
Doesn't that reliance on collective external legal action contradict the mantra of individual responsibility?
The sources don't resolve this, but the synthesis suggests a strategic choice. He frames the lawsuit not as personal vengeance, but as fighting a collective ideological cancer within the institutions.
So he's using the collective legal system to fight what he perceives as a collective ideological disease.
Exactly. It's a form of cleaning the world's room rather than his own. It's the political application of his individual rules.
And the legal update, according to what we've gathered, is definitive. In November 2024, the court dismissed Peterson's lawsuit against WLU.
And a day later, Shepard's lawsuit was also dismissed. So a major high-stakes legal chapter in the fallout from the C-16 pivot has now officially concluded, and neither side walked away with a monetary victory.
Moving on, Peterson has developed a comprehensive intellectual framework to explain the perceived corruption of modern Western culture, particularly within universities. It centers on what he famously terms the postmodern neo-Marxist critique. For a deep dive like ours, we need to take the time to really understand what he means by this fusion of ideas, since it forms the central pillar of his cultural messaging.
This concept is central to his public appeal, but it's also highly controversial and, as the sources show, relies on a conflation of two distinct philosophical traditions.
His core diagnosis is that universities are largely responsible for the rise of political correctness in North America and Europe.
A rise which he claims has been happening since the early 1990s.
So let's break down those two components, postmodernism and neo-Marxism, through the lens of his critique.
Okay, so Peterson sees postmodernism, the philosophy often associated with figures like Foucault and Derrida, as fundamentally corrosive because it denies objective truth.
Right.
In his view, it posits that all knowledge is merely a subjective interpretation used to exert power. And this leads to profound moral relativism and the belief that the structures we live in, law, hierarchy, competence, are merely oppressive social constructs.
And then he connects this to neo-Marxism, which is the class struggle repurposed.
Precisely. Traditional Marxism focused on the economic struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. Peterson contends that neo-Marxism takes this underlying dialectic of oppressor versus oppressed and applies it not to economics, but to identity.
So race, gender, sexuality.
Exactly. Therefore, the oppressed groups, minorities, women, and so on, are pitted against the oppressive groups, who he identifies as white, heterosexual, competent men. He refers to this fusion as cultural Marxism and views it as actively undermining proper culture and Western civilization.
So he essentially uses the terms cultural Marxism and postmodernism interchangeably because he sees both as tools designed to deconstruct the established Western narrative and overthrow existing hierarchies.
Hierarchies which he believes are largely based on competence. That's the entire architecture of his critique, and his solution is highly provocative.
He explicitly advises students to avoid subjects he claims are indoctrination cults.
Yes, like sociology, anthropology, English literature, and ethnic and racial studies. He even suggested cutting funding for these liberal arts programs.
He once threatened to launch a website to systematically reduce enrollment in these postmodern neo-Marxist cult classes by 75% across the West.
His opposition to identity politics follows logically from this critique. It does. He argues that identity politics is practiced by both the left on behalf of the oppressed and the right with nationalism and ethnic pride.
And he says both are equally dangerous because they force the individual to dissolve into the collective group identity.
The correct game, in his view, the antidote to both fascism and cultural Marxism, is radical individualism. Focus on your individual life, assume maximal personal responsibility, and strive to articulate your own truth. This is the bedrock of his self-help message.
This focus on the individual path naturally leads to his views on gender and masculinity. He frequently discusses what he calls the crisis of masculinity.
And a backlash against masculinity in which the masculine spirit is under assault.
He connects this to the perceived political push to feminize men, warning that if men are pushed too hard in that direction,
they will be left without a healthy, integrated model of male being and will subsequently become more and more interested in harsh, fascist political ideology.
He believes the rejection of natural, competent hierarchy is inherently dangerous, and he addresses this hierarchy directly.
He does. He argues that the left characterizes the existing structure as an oppressive patriarchy, but ignores the possibility that the hierarchy might be predicated on competence or natural biological drivers.
He believes that male aggression and competition are inherent.
And that one of civilization's greatest achievements was transforming destructive aggression into productive competence. He also makes a compelling, if historically controversial, argument connecting the reduction of male violence in society directly to the social institution of monogamy.
claiming it stabilizes male-dominated society.
Yes.
Perhaps the most globally circulated visual representation of his views on gender and hierarchy came from that 2018 Channel 4 News interview with Kathy Newman.
Oh, absolutely.
Specifically the debate over the gender pay gap. It was explosive viewing.
That interview went viral immediately and became highly contentious. Peterson claimed during the debate that a multivariate analysis of the pay gap indicates that it doesn't exist.
And he argued that the observed gap was primarily attributable to factors other than discrimination.
Right, things like different career choices, working hours, and critically, personality variations between men and women, such as risk tolerance and agreeableness.
What's crucial to recall about the aftermath is the sheer scale of the online toxicity. Kathy Newman became the victim of a vicious online harassment campaign following the interview.
Including threats and vicious misogynistic abuse, which prompted Channel 4 News to consult with security specialists.
And this is a recurring and crucial pattern we see in the sources.
It is. Peterson, while calling on his supporters to back off, simultaneously denied that the harassment reflected fundamental misogyny within his audience space.
It's this paradoxical dynamic. He preaches individual order and self-mastery, but his commentary seems to activate a high degree of collective, aggressive chaos in the digital sphere.
Which he then dismisses as an aberration rather than a consequence of the intensity of the ideological conflict he incites.
Now we transition to two major areas where Peterson has attracted enormous criticism, beginning with his stance on the environment. And here the sources are unequivocal. Peterson is identified as a climate change denier who publicly expresses disbelief in the robust scientific consensus.
His involvement here is deep. He has been identified by climate scientists as a key organizer at the global level for efforts to oppose and delay action on climate change.
So his public statements on the topic are not merely skeptical.
Not at all. They are profoundly provocative and, according to critics, deeply mistaken about the underlying science.
We must detail the claims he made during his notorious 2022 appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience. He stated, shockingly, that there is no such thing as climate,
claiming that climate and everything are the same word. He argued that the concept is too complex and diffuse to be modeled or acted upon scientifically.
And he denied the accuracy of climate modeling, confusing them with simple, short-term weather forecasting models, a fundamental scientific error.
Furthermore, he actively cited prominent climate change deniers, such as Fred Singer, to bolster his arguments.
And falsely asserted that fracking has not polluted water supplies.
A claim explicitly contradicted by extensive studies and reports cited in our source material. This shows a profound reliance on non-peer-reviewed or politically motivated sources over consensus science.
The reaction from the scientific community was swift and decisive, and we must report the severity of that response.
We do. Professor John Abraham referred to Peterson's statements as a word salad of nonsense spoken by people who have no sense when it comes to climate.
And Michael E. Mann, a high-profile climate scientist, called it pseudo-intellectual and pseudo-scientific drivel,
accusing Peterson of betraying either a total lack of understanding of how science works or, more likely, a total disdain for his audience and an intention to disinform.
The sources position him as a central cog in the denial machine, providing a platform for figures like Judith Curry and Alex Epstein.
And researchers highlight what they term the new denial. It's no longer about denying climate change exists, as the evidence is too pervasive.
So instead, the current strategy, which Peterson employs, is to argue that solutions won't work, that the science backing those solutions is unreliable,
or that the economic cost of action outweighs the benefits. His own organization, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, or ARC, hosted a conference that promoted human flourishing over climate apocalypticism.
Shifting gears completely, let's explore his religious views, which are characterized by a profound, sometimes contradictory, ambivalence.
It's a real tension between his Jungian foundations and traditional belief.
When asked in a 2017 interview if he was a Christian, he said yes. But his response when asked if he believes in God is famously evasive.
Right, it's intellectualized. No, but I'm afraid he might exist.
This response captures the intellectual wrestling match at the heart of his work. He's concerned less with literal theological belief,
and more with the pragmatic evolutionary reality of archetypal narratives. he approaches God functionally.
In a 2022 podcast, he stated that God is the ultimate fictional character at the top of the hierarchy of attention and action.
Meaning the ultimate representation of the highest good we must strive toward to avoid catastrophe.
This philosophical engagement with Scripture led to his massive video series, The Psychological Significance of the Biblical Stories,
where he analyzes archetypal narratives in Genesis as patterns of behavior ostensibly vital for personal, social, and cultural stability. He has since done series on Exodus and Proverbs on Daily Wire plus Moan.
His interpretation draws heavily from Jungian analysis, finding common ground with Christian existentialists like Søren Kierkegaard and Paul Tillich.
And this brings us to a significant academic critique introduced by Daniel Burstyn, who utilizes Tillich's framework to diagnose a crucial absence in Peterson's religious philosophy.
This is a dense academic point, so let's use an ELI5 approach to make the Tillich critique absolutely clear for you, the learner.
Sounds good.
What did Paul Tillich mean by the vertical and horizontal dimensions of religious experience, and how does Peterson's focus fit into that?
Simply put, Tillich viewed faith as having two inseparable dimensions. The vertical dimension is the individual's confrontation with the transcendent, the struggle for meaning, the search for God, or the effort to achieve personal psychological and moral order.
So that's the private internal journey.
Exactly. And Peterson's work is almost entirely focused here. Clean your room, confront your chaos, embody the logos. It's all about achieving internal order.
So if that's the vertical, your soul reaching for the divine, what is the horizontal?
The horizontal dimension is the outward expression of faith. It's the commitment to the human community, social justice, and political action. The tradition of the biblical prophets who demanded justice for the poor and marginalized.
It's the application of moral order to the social sphere.
Precisely. Burstyn argues that Peterson's views reflect a heavy preoccupation with the vertical, transcendent dimension while neglecting the horizontal dimension of social justice.
And the implication of neglecting that horizontal dimension.
Burstyn characterizes Peterson's one-sided emphasis on internal or inner-worldly transformation as a hallmark of the traditionalist conservative mindset. It essentially removes the political and communal obligation from the religious experience.
Arguing that if every individual fixes themselves, the social structure will automatically fix itself.
Which is a key critique from the left, this dismissal of structural injustice.
That preoccupation with the psychological utility of belief over theological certainty was thrown into the spotlight very recently.
It was. In May 2025, during a viral Jubilee media debate, originally titled, "One Christian versus 20 Atheists," Peterson surprised the participants by refusing to definitively identify as a Christian.
He remained evasive about his religious beliefs, which forced the platform to retitle the debate.
It shows he remains intellectually elusive on this core identity question, even while he discusses the Bible constantly and claims to be defending Western civilization.
The speed at which Peterson built his platform outside of academia is staggering, and it provided him with the financial independence required to sustain his controversial cultural interventions.
Absolutely. He launched his YouTube channel in 2013, initially uploading just recordings of his lectures. But by August 2018, his channels had amassed millions of subscribers and hundreds of millions of views.
The democratization of knowledge offered by YouTube was key, but the shift in monetization was just as vital for his independence.
From early 2017, his funding skyrocketed through Patreon. Donations went from about $1,000 per month in August 2016 to over $80,000 per month by May 2018.
That level of direct funding provided unparalleled independence from institutional and traditional publishing constraints. He didn't need grants or university approval anymore.
But then he made a major symbolic statement by deleting his account in January 2019 in public protest over the platform, banning another content creator, Carl Benjamin.
Better known as Sargon of Akkad.
Right. That move reinforced his image as a champion of free speech fighting against big tech censorship. Following that, he attempted to create his own alternative platform called ThinkSpot,
designed specifically for free speech.
But unfortunately, the sources note it received largely negative reviews from media critics upon its limited release, proving that building a successful tech alternative is harder than critiquing existing platforms.
He also recently launched the Peterson Academy in 2024, an online education platform.
His partnership with the Daily Wire in 2022 was another major strategic move. That deal handles the distribution rights for his entire video and podcast library, integrating him firmly into a major conservative media ecosystem.
And he's also built institutions outside the standard academic matrix. He became chancellor of Ralston College, a private, unaccredited liberal arts college in 2022.
And co-founded the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, or ARC, in 2023. This is a landscape built on alternative media, alternative funding, and alternative institutions, all designed to bypass the perceived woke mainstream.
And that alternative structure has been absolutely essential for him because it provided a base of support as he faced relentless regulatory battles and legal challenges.
Challenges stemming directly from his public speech. The most significant is the ongoing scrutiny from the College of Psychologists of Ontario, the CPO.
His professional licensing body. And this is a crucial area that highlights the fundamental tension between his public persona as an unfiltered media commentator
And his private professional responsibilities as a licensed clinical psychologist. So what were the CPO's findings?
Well, in November 2022, the CPO ordered him to complete a specified continuing education or remedial program regarding professionalism in public statements.
And the Inquiries, Complaints, and Reports Committee concluded that his public language between January and June 2022 may be reasonably regarded by members of the profession as disgraceful, dishonorable, and unprofessional.
What specifically triggered that determination? I mean, his comments are almost always aimed at political targets, not clients.
They cited two key issues. First, that he engaged in degrading comments about a former client, which is an immediate, egregious violation of professional ethics and confidentiality.
A huge deal for a psychologist.
Massive. Second, they cited that he made demeaning jokes on the Joe Rogan Experience. The CPO determined that his statements posed moderate risk of harm to the public by undermining public trust in the profession of psychology itself.
They weren't judging his politics, they were judging his professional comportment in the public sphere.
Precisely. And Peterson denied any wrongdoing and immediately filed for judicial review, arguing violations of free speech, claiming the order was political retribution.
This is the moment we need to pause and analyze the true professional significance of this regulatory defeat, which is a key insight for you, the learner.
The implication of this legal loss cannot be overstated. For a psychologist of his global renown, having his professional governing body mandate remedial social media training is a massive, highly public professional sanction.
A unique form of regulatory shaming.
It is. He fought it all the way up, arguing that his status as a public intellectual should afford him greater leeway, but the courts disagreed.
In August 2023, the Ontario Divisional Court unanimously upheld the CPO's decision, finding the ICRC's reasoning transparent, intelligible, justifiable, and reasonable.
And ordered him to pay $25,000 in legal costs.
His final option, an appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada, was declined in August 2024.
This action closed his legal avenues for resistance, forcing him to agree to the social media training mandated by the college. It's a definitive judgment. His license to practice, which is the ultimate professional marker of his expertise, comes with regulatory boundaries regarding public professionalism.
Boundaries that the court found he repeatedly violated.
In addition to the CPO battle, there was the highly publicized Cambridge University rescindment in 2019. This wasn't about his academic work or his license, but the institution's reaction to his political associations.
That's right. Cambridge University rescinded a visiting fellowship invitation due to a photograph of Peterson with a fan wearing a shirt that read, "I'm a proud Islamophobe."
And the university felt that this casual endorsement by association conflicted sharply with its institutional commitment to interfaith dialogue.
Peterson, in response, called the decision an error of judgment and accused the divinity faculty of submitting to an ill-informed, ignorant, and ideologically addled mob.
He also noted the practical difficulty of his celebrity, saying the photo was just one of 30,000 taken with fans, and that he would stop posing with fans wearing provocative political garb.
It demonstrates the tightrope he walks. His global platform is powered by controversy, but that controversy makes traditional institutional engagement almost impossible.
A difficult position to be in.
As his public life exploded, his private life was consumed by severe personal and health crises, which began with radical dietary changes.
Changes that garnered almost as much media attention as his political views. We need to discuss the infamous lion diet.
In 2016, Peterson initially restricted his diet to only meat and a few select vegetables to manage depression and autoimmune issues.
And by mid-2018, he restricted it further to only beef, salt, and water, the ultra-restrictive lion diet. His daughter, Michaela, also adopted and heavily promoted this diet as a remedy for chronic conditions.
While he championed it as a cure, Experts warned, and we must include this balance, that such an extremely restrictive diet can result in severe dysregulation and nutritional deficits.
And this radical diet was closely linked to the catastrophic health period that followed. It
Yeah.
was. He was prescribed clonazepam, a potent benzodiazepine, for anxiety starting in 2016.
And his usage reportedly increased significantly.
From zero point 0.5 milligram a day to 4 milligram a day by 2020, due to a confluence of factors. Stress from his explosive public career, the reported violent reaction to his meat and greens diet, and his wife Tammy's serious kidney cancer diagnosis.
Here is where the crisis peaked. He suffered horrific benzodiazepine withdrawal syndrome as he tried to stop the drug.
I mean, flying across the world and being put into a medically induced coma because of benzodiazepine withdrawal. That is a level of desperation and extremity that fundamentally changes how we view his public image.
Let's talk about the context of that decision.
It's a staggering ordeal that demonstrates the severity of benzodiazepine dependency and withdrawal. The desperation of his condition led to extraordinary measures. In January 2020, he traveled to Moscow because he claimed he couldn't find North American doctors willing to place him in a medically induced coma for detox treatment, which he felt was his only option.
He was in the coma for 8 days, followed by 4 weeks in the intensive care unit.
And suffered a temporary loss of motor skills as his body reacted to the sudden cessation of the drug.
That is an unbelievable medical crisis involving international travel during a health emergency and radical invasive treatment measures.
He stated he was back to his regular self by mid-2020, but his health struggles seem ongoing and severe.
They are. The sources detail very recent health issues, current as of December 2025. Since August 2025, he has suffered from chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or CIRS, requiring 5 months of hospitalization.
He was diagnosed with polyneuropathy and myopathy. As of December 2025, his family confirmed his return home, noting that he'd shown little improvement.
This suggests a continued serious battle with complex chronic illness, even as he attempts to maintain his robust public life and lecture schedule.
For sure.
Finally, let's synthesize his influence and the lingering criticisms of his public perception. The New Yorker called him one of the most influential and polarizing public intellectuals in the English-speaking world.
This polarization is reflected in the criticism he faces, often aimed not just at his ideas, but at his perceived audience. McClellan's famously characterized him as a pseudo-intellectual popular with the alt-right,
And labeled him as the stupid man's smart person.
a phrase frequently repeated by other publications to imply that his profundity is superficial and easily digestible for those who resist critical thought.
And one of the most recent high-profile criticisms connected him directly to online male toxicity and the incel community.
That was Olivia Wilde, promoting her 2022 film Don't Worry, Darling. She claimed the sinister character Frank was inspired by Peterson, calling him this insane man, Jordan Peterson, who is this pseudo-intellectual hero to the incel community.
This exchange perfectly encapsulates his current status.
It does. Peterson, predictably, hit back hard, calling the film propaganda disseminated by woke, self-righteous bores and bullies.
And regarding the term incel, which means involuntarily celibate,
He argued it was merely a casual insult used against lonesome men who are already struggling again, applying the individual responsibility lens to a collective social problem.
he is the intellectual who is inextricably linked, both by critics and by his own defensive reactions, to the cultural conflicts currently defining the digital landscape.
Whether he likes the association or not.
So what does this all mean? We've traced the remarkable decade-long trajectory of Jordan Peterson, from a specialized clinical psychologist researching mythological archetypes and the pathology of totalitarian ideologies,
To a figure who leveraged technology to become a global media phenomenon, constantly challenging cultural norms.
His move from academia to public intellectual was catalyzed by a fundamental disagreement over speech and ideology, specifically Bill C-16.
And that moment rapidly transformed his work into a comprehensive critique of postmodern neo-Marxism and the perceived crisis of masculinity.
This path has been paved with multi-country bestsellers, extraordinary fundraising success, but also a definitive regulatory defeat by the College of Psychologists of Ontario, constant professional scrutiny, and severe, highly public health battles that continue to the present day.
What's undeniable is the unique blend he represents. Deep academic grounding in figures like Jung, Nietzsche, and Dostoevsky, combined with highly politicized, culturally engaged commentary that challenges institutional norms, particularly in the humanities.
He simultaneously advocates for profound individual responsibility and engages deeply in collective culture wars.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the learner. We've seen how Jordan Peterson advocates for finding internal order, cleaning your room, focusing on the individual journey, taking responsibility.
He spent his early career studying the pathology of collective chaos, arguing that unintegrated individual evil leads to totalitarian destruction.
Yet his global influence is inextricably linked to external, highly polarizing group conflicts, the very collective chaos of the culture wars that his platform helped fuel.
Given this context drawn from the source material, how might the initial goal of achieving individual psychological order intersect with, or be fundamentally undermined by, the extreme and external chaos required to maintain the platform that preaches that order?
What is the ultimate psychological price of being a globally focused public intellectual versus the quiet, private academic he once was?